Thanks. And how you go about doing that is attending these sessions. So for attending tonight, and we know that you attended by either filling out the link that's in the chat box to the form to put in your information to sign in. But we're also taking, in case you missed that, we're also taking kind of note of who is here. So you'll get 1 point for attending this session or any of these sessions coming up, and you see the other ones that are on here throughout the next, really throughout the academic year. And then if you do the deliverable that all of them have, you'll get 3 points each time that you do one of those associated with one of the sessions. And also in the chat box, Tess has added what those questions and deliverable assignments are for this session. And you can talk to the panelists about that. They're the ones who provided this information for us. Those deliverables, whether it's putting together a science policy type briefing, a slide deck, or answering interview questions, they will either be reviewed by our postdoctoral scientific editing and reviewing team or through our Jefferson Career Development Center, especially for tonight's, because there are several interview questions and answers that are involved. If I could just have actually Pam Walter, if you could unmute yourself and just for a minute, tell us a little bit more about the postdoc scientific editing and review team, because they'll be doing review of the majority of the deliverables throughout the year.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm Pam Walter from the Office for Professional Writing, Publishing, and Communication. And I'm also a mentor to a group here at Jefferson called the Postdoctoral Scientific Editing and Reviewing Team. And this is a group of half a dozen or so postdocs and graduate students who review papers for one another and also do a multitude of other kinds of reviewing activities, including reviewing for this science communication badge. And they've done reviewing for the grant writing class that many PhD students take. So they come in and review presentations for that class. And really, they are editors in training, reviewers in training, and they all have PhDs and MDs, and they're very much interested in sharing their knowledge with others who would like their feedback. So that's why they're going to be helping out and looking at the assignments from this activity. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Pam. And I think with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to the co-host, Tess Sherwin.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Again, thank you so much all of you for being here. I'm excited to introduce our panelists in a moment. I just first would like to take a moment of silence to honor the memory of Walter Wallace Jr., a 27-year-old Black man who was shot and killed yesterday by police in West Philadelphia. So if we could all just take a moment of silence, I would really appreciate it, and I'll pull us out of it in a moment. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace's death is a reminder that injustice still permeates all aspects of American life. As citizen scientists, it's necessary for us to acknowledge this. We have the power to push the needle toward a more just future, and we're calling on you to all raise your voice for science, for humanity, and for justice by voting in the 2020 election this year. So please, if you haven't yet, vote. And if you have any resources or causes to share with the group, you can add them to the chat. I am going to add a couple that we support at the university, and feel free to do the same. Thank you so much. And without further ado, I'm so honored and privileged to introduce these wonderful panelists that we have today. So first, I'll introduce Dr. Danielle Haney. She is a political analyst. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. She's going to introduce herself. I am just a little overwhelmed at the moment. She's an analyst at the NIH, and she'll be talking about science policy. Next, we have Dr. Lauren Marek, and she is she just started her new job, and she'll be talking about being an account manager and her career path to that. And we have Dr. Lisa Ambrose-Lanci, and she is a VP and account manager director, and she'll be talking about her career path. And then we have Dr. Michael Sangobowale, and he'll be talking about his career being a medical science liaison and his career path to that. And so I won't introduce them anymore because they'll be sharing their information. So the way that this event is going to go is we're going to have the panelists speak for the next, they'll take turns speaking about their career paths for the next amount of time. And at that point, at that halfway marker, we'll be splitting into 2 rounds of breakout sessions. The first, you get to choose which of our wonderful experts that you would like to learn more from and talk to. So you'll get to go and talk to them in a breakout room, and then we'll do that again in a second breakout room. And so if you can see that our panelists have a number at the beginning of their name. So there's Dr. Haney has a 1, Dr. Sangobowale has a 4, etc. If you can put the number that of the group you would like to go, the person you would like to speak to at the beginning of your name, then for the first round, I'll be able to split you into those breakout sections, and then we'll come back and do it again for the second breakout session. I hope that was clear, but you have the next 30 minutes to decide which person you want to talk to first. So then you can hover your cursor over your name, click the little more button, and rename yourself to have a number at the start of your name. All right, and feel free to side chat me if you need help with that while we start the conversation. So without further ado, we'll start with Dr. Haney. Please take it away.
Okay, sure. How long did you want our introductions to be each? About
like 7 to 10 minutes is totally great.
Okay. Ooh, all right. So as Tess said,
or shorter or longer, not longer.
Okay, no.
Shorter's fine, but not longer if that's okay.
Okay. My name is Danielle Haney, and I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in, oh my gosh, 2011. It feels like ages ago. And my PhD was in immunology. So my perspective there as a grad student when I was there, I was studying the immune effects to HIV in adolescents. And even during my time as a graduate student, I was extremely interested in understanding the community that I was studying, not just the cells. And that actually led to a lot of my decisions during my graduate school process. And I actually think even more has informed my entire career process. I also started a STEM outreach program that I think some of you may have volunteered with, Science Education Academy, which works to bring scientists to students in West Philadelphia. We actually have a virtual program going on right now on Saturday, so I'll put a plug because we are looking for volunteers for that. And also during my time at Penn, I was in the graduate consulting group and got a lot of experiences in consulting with nonprofits who were developing diagnostic care for overseas, but also in the science communication space. Ultimately, I kind of identified early on that there were so many different things I was interested in, but didn't necessarily directly relate to the work I was doing in the lab. It was kind of tangential, meaning I needed my analytical skills, I needed my program management skills, I needed the communications skills that you learn in graduate school to really catapult me into the careers that I've had so far. Ultimately, my degree in immunology and need to do outreach in the community kind of led me to look into more science communications based work, which is also the communications, the consulting job I did as a graduate student at Penn. How I received that first job was actually having my resume. I dropped my resume off at a career fair, and then Ethos Health Communications, now they've changed their name, called me back for an interview. What they were looking for was someone with a background in immunology. And I'll tell you guys quickly kind of about the work I did there, but I'll leave that to the other panelists who have remained in that field. So during my time there, I did a lot of medical advisory boards, a lot of program management, a great deal of budget management, and team management. Ultimately, our goal was to take our client, who was a pharmaceutical company, science, and promote that to different audiences. So you had to be well aware of how to talk to certain types of healthcare providers, how to talk to patients, and even if you had sales training, how to really talk and educate the sales training workforce. Ultimately, a lot of the work there involved you gathering insights from different types of professionals and really understanding that a cardiologist, a MS specialist, a multiple sclerosis doctor, a nurse would have different approaches, but would also need different information from the scientific research or scientific publications that have resulted from whatever drug or disease state that you were speaking to. So you were always challenged in a way to really kind of think about the best way to communicate the information to them. But ultimately, you want that your end goal was to sell the drug better. So during that process, I really enjoyed that work. It was quite fast paced and actually very focused with what we did with Congress planning and things of that nature. As my time progressed, I realized that I actually kind of wanted to leave Philly and really take the work that I'd done with developing patient programs, really thinking about policy implications of STEM outreach, and take that into government. So I decided to apply for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. With that, what I ended up doing was going into the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and working in a policy shop that both had policy, communications, engagement, and analysis. A lot of my time in that office was actually taking the skills that I already gained in the previous position to do the following things: communicate the science of heart disease to the public by developing health education programs. That involved me working directly with policy and advocacy groups like the American Heart Association, Women Heart Association, also having similar advisory boards to get feedback from communities and policy advocates, and also working with Congress to determine what were some of the best steps for funding for the types of work we were doing. And also created health education programs based on the science that our institute was putting out, and found ways to disseminate that information by social media, by developing community health worker programs, and things of that nature. In addition to I got a lot of experience in that job on the policy side of things with responding to Congress, really taking an overall stake of what the Institute's investment was. A lot of what you'll hear when NIH analysts speak is when you're in graduate school, you learn a lot about the scientists applying for grants. But really on the inside of the NIH, what we're trying to determine is really what grants we are funding and what that overall landscape looks like and where the holes are and what we should fund more of. And to get those questions, we really do a lot of analysis of our overall grant portfolio. We once again get insight from stakeholder groups, like policy groups and investigators, to determine what types of funding announcements should be put out, to determine what types of support are needed to spur a particular area of science as well. And then we also determine like what communities might need to perform certain aspects of their work. So I was once again working in an engagement office, and one of the things we supported was a COPD plan where we funded community organizations to do dissemination and communications projects to effectively reach the communities in their region, something that we as a national government agency couldn't do, but we could fund them to do the work in their local area. So there were a lot of different things I did in that first step as a policy fellow, and then continued on in that job. I now work as a senior analyst on the HEAL initiative, which is a $1 billion initiative or effort to reduce the pain and opioid crises. My work in this particular area is similar, and once again, and similarly builds on everything that I've done previously, which includes organizing national meetings like our investigator meeting that's 500 to 1,000 people each year, pivoting to in-person and virtual, and really thinking about what the scientists should be talking about and getting input on what they want to discuss, using all that information to inform our overall internal processes. I've done a lot of strategic planning. I also look at some of our clinical trial funding. NIH funds a lot of clinical trials, and we want to make sure that those trials make it to certain milestones. So I work with understanding overall clinical trial recruitment trends and developing resources and providing funding for engaging patients through the process to promote retention and recruitment. So ultimately that leads to, once again, finding ways to train or assist investigators in effectively carrying out the aims of their research. So I know I've said a lot, but ultimately everything I do each day is basically communications, whether that be having a conversation, understanding what insights are needed to inform the next thing, whether that be quickly responding to an email from Collins's office asking for what our research investment is because Congress needs it as soon as possible, or would that be like creating presentations for myself or senior leadership to give to organizations that may be wanting to understand or learn a little bit more about the NIH process and also give us input. And I would be happy to answer any questions whenever it's breakout time or whenever we do that about like the varying things that I've been able to do with the PhD in science.
Wonderful, wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of that amazing experience, and I've just been so inspired by so many things I didn't know about, so thank you. We're gonna move on to our next speaker, Dr. Marek. Can you please take the floor?
Sure. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. So I'm Lauren. I moved to Philly about 2 years ago, and right now I am an account manager at a medical communications agency called AlphaBioCom, and I actually just started this job yesterday. So I'm new in this role, but what I'm going to do is start from my grad school experiences and then tell you how I got to there. So I defended about a year ago from Weill Cornell. I was in the pharmacology department there. I studied acute myeloid leukemia. My lab was actually in Memorial Sloan Kettering. So I defended about a year ago. I stayed on as a postdoc for about, I would say, 6 months-ish. So throughout that entire time in my lab, I knew already that I didn't want to be in academia. And so I decided to kind of figure out exactly what realm I wanted to be in. Initially, I thought, okay, I'll go into industry because that's always what they tell you is your option, academia or industry. But so when I realized that science communication was a thing, I explored it a little bit further, and the way I thought about it for me is that it kind of falls into two general buckets. So for me, I thought about it as science communication to the public or science communication to scientists. And on the scientist side, you can think about that in you're communicating the actual science, you know, conferences, symposiums, whatever. You can think about it in terms of mentorship or leadership development. That all goes in that kind of bucket for me. And then the other bucket is to the public. So that could be patients, that could be you know, in education from, you know, preschool all the way through college education, that that could fall into that bucket. And to be honest, I was kind of interested in all of those things. So I kind of did a lot of things in grad school that would fall into either bucket that would help me in a career that I can kind of put on a resume that said, I did this and, you know, give me a job. So a couple of the things that I did, one was I ran our student symposium, our annual symposium for 3 years. So I did all of the things that you could imagine in terms of what committees I was on. I also chaired it. So that can fall under science communication to scientists and kind of symposium planning and project management. The other things that I did were, as soon as I moved to Philly, I worked with a nonprofit called iPraxis. And so the mission of iPraxis is to provide access to science education in underserved schools. And so the reason I liked this organization is because we actually went into schools every day of the week. And so that depended on the school, it was either during school time or outside of school time. But the way that the teachers let us do that was we actually were teaching the scientific method lessons to the students rather than having the students do it. So, or having the teachers do it. So, so I liked that model because it was like the students can get an outside perspective instead of their teachers. You can get a scientist perspective, and you have kind of a sustainable way of I'm going to the same school, seeing the same students, helping them with their science fair projects throughout the school year, and they kind of have a someone to look up to in that sense. So that falls into my bucket of SciComm for the public and outreach. So as I moved into transition to a postdoc role, moved to Philly, I was still working with iPraxis, but I also came across an opportunity through networking, like I always say to do. In this case, networking was a friend introduced me to his friend. So just as a sidebar, I would not be scared of networking because your network is really your friends. So if you kind of tap into that and see who they know first, it might work out. So anyway, this what I did before I started this current job is consulted for a group at Penn at the Center for Cytokine Storm Laboratories and Treatment. And so their group was looking for a scientist to help with strategic direction of their project. And so I joined them in a consulting capacity, one, because of the hiring freeze, because this was back in June, July, and two, because they didn't actually have enough work for me to join full time. So what I've been doing since July is helping out their team with strategic directions for their projects, meaning internal meetings with their scientific team to see which directions they should go. If a lot of their projects were with data tracking, so it was kind of the nitty gritty, like what data should we be collecting? Where do we get this data? On the other hand, I was also relationship building with external collaborators for them. So I would be the first person that an external collaborator would meet with, vet them, see if the collaboration is fruitful. I'm not sure that this type of position would necessarily exist or be advertised a whole lot, but because of the situation with COVID and everything being virtual, it sort of worked out that way, and it's also one of those things where they were waiting for funding from HHS to actually move forward with some of their projects, which is another reason why I couldn't join full time. And so, in thinking about what I wanted from kind of a SciComm career, I was applying to jobs, throughout this whole time. And I applied to the company I now work for, AlphaBioCom, but I actually applied for a different position. So I applied for a scientific technical editor because with their job postings, that was the one that I was most qualified for, so I thought I could get in that way. But it turns out that they had already filled that position, just hadn't taken down the posting. But I was contacted by the accounts team in their agency if I was interested in joining the accounts side. So what that means is in the medical communications agency, at least in the one I work for, they have the scientific team, the accounts team, which the accounts team works primarily with your client. So we work with the pharmaceutical companies. Scientific team, you can think about it's the writers, the people who make the slide decks and things like that. So the accounts team was not something I actually considered at all because it didn't seem like they wanted a scientist in that role. But it turns out that they did. So I interviewed, this was all, within the past month and a half. So if anybody is going to get a job during these virtual times, I can tell you that it is possible. And so what I primarily do now, or what I will do once I get more into the job, is I'll be working with, it's essentially a liaison position between the scientific team at our company and the client that we're working for, and we primarily do publications management. So if a pharmaceutical company wants to publish their work in a journal, go to a conference and needs an abstract and a poster, if they need to create slide decks for their medical science liaisons, then that all goes through the scientific team who develops the content. And what the accounts team does is really kind of bridge the gap between the client and the scientific team. So I didn't actually know that before this, that this was a position that that they would want a scientist to have, but in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. And so, I'm happy to have found a job during this time, but also it's, so far it's been a good fit for me.
Awesome, thank you. Wow, yeah, finding a job right now seems really hard. And when I first started talking to Lauren, she was saying that she was at her other position, but she'd be happy to talk about what applying for positions during COVID was actually like. And I'm so happy you got this position. Congrats. We'll move on to Dr. Ambrose-Lanci, and please take it away. It'll be a great transition into what you have to look forward to maybe one day, Lauren.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Ambrose-Lanci, and Danielle and Lauren gave a great introduction to the medical communication field where I've spent the last 9 years of my career. So thank you for that. And we can, build on that and kind of talk about what the day-to-day looks like as you move into that type of position. But first, I'll give you a little bit of background on my, my path and journey to this point. So I received my PhD in 2009 from Thomas Jefferson University. My PhD was in molecular cell biology, and my research was in neuroscience and drug addiction. From there, I had the opportunity to do a postdoc at Penn, and was able to do so in a lab that focused on the genetics of addiction. So a lot of diagnostic high throughput sequencing, and kind of built on some of the work that I'd done more in the lab in my graduate work. So I knew at that time that I wasn't, sure I wanted to go to the professor route, but I didn't 100% know what I wanted to do, and really enjoyed doing my postdoc and getting just more experience under my belt, and more experiencing managing graduate students, managing multiple projects, learning a new, new type of experiments, etc. So just a question often received is, do you need a postdoc to do this type of career? And you really don't need one, but in my opinion, it doesn't hurt. I think it's fine either way. It's really your own choice and journey. And usually companies are open to either. So that's just something I wanted to share based on my past experience. So I did a 2-year postdoc and happened to hear about my previous company where I had the opportunity to work with Danielle for a few years. So it's so great to hear where she is now and all that she has done. And I had never heard of this type of role. I wouldn't have known it existed. So I think this scientific career certificate that Jefferson is doing is really great, just to start talking about these things as early as possible. And I took a chance and took this role, very similar to you, Lauren, where I entered in more on the account side of things. The way my previous company was structured, there was an account side, which is project managers, project coordinators, the scientific team that was, the medical writers, people developing the content. And then there was this strategic account manager where I started. So that is usually a PhD role, MD, MBA, looking for those types of degrees, but where you're, as Lauren nicely said, sort of a liaison between the client, which is often you're a pharmaceutical company, a brand manager, and your full team that is working to develop content for various audiences, whether it be for physicians to train other physicians, whether it be just to ensure that the field teams have the information that they need to go out and talk to certain stakeholders in that particular disease state, as well as congresses, advisory boards, just really thinking through the strategy for your particular client's brand or disease state and what needs to be, what can help them to get their message out into that particular community. So after spending about 4 years at my previous company, I moved to my current company because they were remote, and they were built that way from the beginning when it was first started. So of course now that's something that a lot of companies had to transition to, but for us that's just how we have always functioned. So that was something I was looking for at that point in my career, being a mother with 2 children. Not having to commute was an asset. So I've been at my current company for 5 years. I'm now the vice president group account director, meaning that there are multiple teams working, I'm managing across multiple teams, all working across similar projects, but for different groups of clients. So I have about 14 account team members that I manage, as well as our team in general is about 25 people, and I have a scientific counterpart that I work closely with to manage across all the projects and all the work streams. I will add that what's been interesting the past 5 years is that my research, my work has really focused on oncology diagnostics. So a lot of times in medical education, you're educating on a particular brand and talking what we would say is branded content, very specific on the efficacy, safety about the drug itself. But there's also unbranded information that needs to get out there about the disease state and how best to test, and ensuring the right patients are going on the right products for their particular mutation, et cetera. So I've had the opportunity to work a lot in that disease state space. And for me, that's been really interesting because it's really ensuring just that as the field changes so much with new diagnostics being available, with new products being available, that the healthcare professionals are staying as up to date as possible, so that as they're treating patients, they have the most up-to-date information, and ensuring that the patients have the best outcome. So I will pause there and happy to answer any questions when we get to that portion of the panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow. Learning so much. Okay, so last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Sangobowale, and he's going to tell us about something kind of similar but a little different, which is being a medical science liaison. And take it away.
Thank you. Yes, like Tess said, my name is Michael Sangobowale, and I'm a medical science liaison at Helsinn Therapeutics. I've been there for about 1.5 years. And I guess I'll go through my journey because my path to my current position is a bit unique in terms of, as a grad student and as a postdoc, I thought I was going to stay in academia. So a lot of the things that I did um, were focused on that. So essentially, I'll start back right after I graduated from undergrad with the notion that I was going to head into academia. I ended up going to Teachers College at Columbia University to get a master's in neuroscience and education. I felt that it would give me a good background and understanding into the educational process, how to manage a classroom, how to teach students at varying levels. So that's where I really started my first path in the direction of neuroscience and what I was pursuing. And after I completed my master's, I got my PhD in neuroscience from SUNY Downstate Medical Center in New York City. And there I primarily focused on, very molecular neuroscience, a lot of clinical research, a lot of translational work, because I was also interested in positioning myself to do a few different things after school. Once I finished my PhD, I ended up doing a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania with a neurologist who was an MD PhD. So a lot of the work that I did there was clinical research focused. And as I was coming into my postdoc, as I said, I was looking to go into academia. So I started off with a T32 fellowship from the NIH. So I was there for 2 years focusing on that. And then while I was additionally during my postdoc, I was also awarded a K-12 fellowship, which is an ARACTA teaching sciences fellowship, essentially, which positions you to get jobs in academia once you're done with your postdoc. So during my ARACTA fellowship, I spent 2 years as a professor. So I taught intro bio, I taught intro neurosciences at 2 local universities, really sort of giving myself the opportunities to solidify that path into academia, because that's really what I thought I was going to do. And about halfway through my postdoc, I was able to, or a friend introduced me to Penn's biotech research group, which is out of Wharton. So I spent a lot of time there working with clients and was open to the field of science communication and being that sort of outward facing person where you're discussing and doing high level work in science and also talking to clients. And that's what interested me in focusing on and looking into the MSL position. So after I spent a few months working with the biotech group, I decided that I could sort of parlay and use all of the skills I had developed with my ARACTA fellowship and my time teaching as a professor into transmitting that into MSL position, which is, it's essentially you're the forward-facing scientist for the pharmaceutical company. So that's really how I used my background and the path that I took, which was somewhat unique, but each one of those steps was something as I went through the interview process that I could sort of touch on and talk to people about that would help me be a good MSL. Touching upon the fact that I've had the clinical experience where I did work with patients and I was, a PI for a phase 2 clinical trial. And then also the fact that I was able to stand up in front of a classroom and talk to students about science and explain things to people on a very different level. So that's essentially transitioned me to the position that I am right now, where I do talk to primarily key opinion leaders and healthcare professionals, working with our sales and marketing teams as people have questions about our products. For example, if a sales rep goes out and is trying to talk to a doctor and they're sort of stumped on a question about what our drug does and they're interested in other things that the drug can do, that's when they'll call the MSL that's within that territory to then reach out to those MDs or key opinion leader to talk to them about things on a more scientific level with what they can do with our drug. So a lot of what I do, people say it's very different every day. My day is different every single day. Sometimes I'm talking to, like I said, I work with sales, I work with marketing, or I'm traveling to a hospital to give sort of an in-service to nurses and help them understand how our products work, or I'm answering high-level questions or off-label questions that an MD might have. Or another day I could be, a lot of what we do is trying to talk to these key opinion leaders. So talking to people that are on the guideline boards that make the decisions in terms of how people use drugs and the type of treatments that they're going to give for their patients. So a lot of what we do is, some of it is reactive, some of it is proactive in terms of addressing the needs around our products. So, this is a quick sort of glimpse into what I do. And if anyone has any more questions, just, like I said, when we get into the breakout sessions, I'm more than open and willing to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. So cool. I thought I knew what an MSL did, and now I know even more. So that wraps up the panelists talking about their career paths section. We're gonna open it up for the next 10 minutes or so with the Q&A. So if you have any questions in the audience that you would like to ask our panelists, you can either unmute yourself, and if you're able to uncamera yourself, or you can add your question to the chat and we can read it for you. To start off the questions, just to get the ball rolling, some of you touched on this about during your career path. I know some of you did some, I think Danielle said she did consulting in graduate school, and other people did some things along the way that helped them transition out of being a basic scientist into science communication. And just, I guess, some of us that are in the audience are graduate students, some of us are postdocs. So what sort of things do you think we could be thinking about to take advantage of, if possible, if we are trying to transition out of basic or bench science? And feel free to answer, whoever wants to answer in whatever order.
Sure. There were three things that I did in particular while in grad school. I hinted at the fact that I studied the immune response to HIV in adolescents. And kind of one of the things that I did during that time was I looked for parallel work at Penn that was going to give me more experience with like understanding how adolescents thought, if that makes sense. So the nursing school at Penn actually had a health disparities section that was studying sexual risk behaviors in African-American teens and intimate partner violence. And I sent a message to, of course, after I got permission from my PI, I sent a message to the PI at the nursing school and asked her if she would let me come maybe like once a month just to sit in and kind of listen to kind of what her approach was to research. And I got some experience listening into some of the focus groups that she did with that particular group. So I got a different aspect of science, so not just like bench work. That was one particular area, and started to understand what it meant to, I guess, code or really think about a different type of science than bench work. So that was very helpful for me moving forward when it came to thinking about how to structure focus groups, which we seem to do a lot of that in all of my work now. The second thing was the Penn Biotech group, which Michael really mentioned. There was an opportunity there to do consulting gigs. I'm not sure if Jefferson has something similar, but that allowed graduate students to work with kind of cross disciplines and work on certain consulting projects. I mentioned I did a nonprofit project and a SciComm project. And the third thing was the STEM nonprofit stuff. So I felt there was an emptiness in the ability for students to interact with the Philadelphia community. And so basically really created a program that infused scientists on Saturdays with kids doing hands-on science experiments, and therefore created long-term volunteer opportunities for other students to really get a chance to engage with the community and work in STEM. And as many of you guys know, there are a lot of STEM education and STEM education communication type positions available. So those are some of the things I did that helped me stand out in interviews.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off what Danielle was saying, some of the things that you might want to think about during grad school and postdoc are not actually formal opportunities. So for example, if you really are interested in like communicating to scientists or mentorship, you can always take on more students to mentor, or something as informal as that, where it gives you that leadership experience in kind of communicating and teaching. The other thing too is that, at least for me, when I started with working at, or volunteering at the nonprofit that I did, that was completely separate from grad school. So it doesn't have to be something that's offered at grad school. You can look outside of that. And then for me in particular, I'm really interested in leadership development as it relates to scientists, because I think there's a lack of leadership training. And so for me, that's why I took on, organizing the symposium and taking on, mentees to mentor in the lab. And then I also, just to kind of bolster that side of myself, did a certificate in the psychology of leadership, which was also separate from grad school. I did it online through, the Cornell online program. So there's like a few things besides like what's offered through grad school that you can look at, or through a postdoc association that you can look at, that are not necessarily formal and not necessarily, a club or something like that.
Yes, I would say for me, I enjoyed the extracurricular opportunities with grad school. So graduate student association, participating in events and planning with that kind of gave me those skills, and also made me realize that I like doing those things. Also, the postdoc association, when I became a postdoc at Penn, Association for Women in Science. That is a great organization and something that really helped me, I feel, find my way in my career. Related to, I would say anytime you are preparing for a presentation, whether it be a poster or a talk at a Congress. So when you're in your research phase, participating in Congresses really helps you learn, like, what is my story? How do I relay this, year or more worth of work in a few minutes, and so people understand what's important. That really hones those skills and shows that you are able to do that. A couple other quick things. Part of my thesis was I was able to do some clinical research. So related to the drug addiction research I was doing in animal models, I did have the opportunity at Jefferson to work in some clinical research related to addiction, and that really helped me think in that way and sort of just use a different part of my brain, learn a little bit differently of how to think about science. And lastly, I don't know if this is still offered, but there was a business class that graduate students were able to take when I was a graduate student, and I took that just to be exposed to, business class, and that was helpful for me, and just thinking in that way as I moved into this type of role.
Yeah, so essentially just piggybacking of what the other panelists have said, for me specifically in the role that I have right now, being that a lot of what MSLs do is sort of translating information and talking to PIs, I highlighted those things that I was able to do as a postdoc. So as a postdoc, I just took on more responsibility, being that my PI was a MD PhD. He did a lot of clinical research, so I made sure that if there were any opportunities for me to essentially be the PI on a study, I took those opportunities, and then I could use that information when I was talking to people I was interviewing, saying, I've been on that side of things. I know what it's like to work with, getting things through the FDA and getting things approved through the IRB. And those are a lot of the things you sort of have to work with universities that are, when they're having these, investigator-initiated trials that they usually run for the pharmaceutical companies. So being able to say that I could speak on the experiences that I had in grad school, and the fact, and as a postdoc, just in terms of highlighting the comfort that you have communicating and talking to people about what you do. You know, I feel like that was one of the most important things as I went through the whole process, was that, you know, people have to feel comfortable with you. You know, on a baseline level, as scientists, we'll understand the information that our companies have, and you'll be able to learn that. It's really about being able to communicate that information seamlessly, in an easy way, to people that are, you know, that you're working with. So I feel like as many opportunities as you have to get up in front of a big audience or act as a liaison for something, you know, it might seem like it's a little bit more work while you're in grad school or as a postdoc, but it's those little experiences that will essentially separate you from other people that, you know, in this world where everyone is essentially the same.
Wow. Yes, all of that sounds, I thank you for sharing all that. I would say that we could have more general questions, but I don't want to take time away from us having more intimate conversations in, you know, related to your specific disciplines. So let's let our speakers take a break, get a drink of water or something. And if you, all of our audience members, if you could put the number that is related, that's next to our 4 panelists that you would like to meet with first. We're gonna have 2 rounds of breakout sessions where you can ask more relevant questions to that person. In a couple of minutes, I'll start putting people in those breakout rooms, and let me know if you have any questions about that or how that's gonna go. You don't have to do anything, I'll just put you in there, and then at the end of the time block, I'll take you out, so don't worry about that. And then if you haven't already seen there, I'll put it again, but if you scroll up a little bit, the panel questions, or sorry, the deliverable questions, which you'll have to do 1 to get the credit for the certificate, are in a PDF. And so each of our panelists created either an interview question or a writing test that read through before you start talking to the experts, so you can ask them questions if you have them about that. And yeah, so please everyone take a short break for a minute or 2, and I'll start moving people into the breakout rooms, and let me know if you have any questions or problems. And if you don't put a number, I'll just randomly place you. How did it go? Was that enough time?
Yeah, I think it was fine.
Yeah, I think in ours, I think everyone got to ask a question.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And Tess, do you want them to go ahead and put another different number now in front?
Yes, that is excellent. I'll say
Except
it
for
once
the panelists.
everyone.
Don't change your numbers.
Yeah, panelists, do not change your numbers.
Number.
That would get very confusing. Okay, so yes, as Lisa just said, take a couple minutes to collect yourself, change your number to the group 2 you'd like to join, and I will start putting you in those groups. A question came up, which was, do you, for the deliverable, do you do 1 or 1 for like each section, either the writing test or the interview questions? You can do 1 to 4 of them. You can do all of them if you want feedback, but you'll only get credit for 1. So you only have to do one. So whichever you feel most compelled to. But if you'd like to like do the 2 interview ones, you can definitely do those and get feedback on your interview questions from the Career Center. So that would be very cool. And another question that came up is, what is the salary range for these different positions? So maybe in the next session, someone, if it hasn't already been addressed, you can address that in your next sessions. I'm sure everyone would love to know. All right, so I'm gonna start putting people in rooms. So if you don't have a number by the end of my shuffling, I will assign you. So fun watching all the people come back. Welcome back, everybody. Nobody wanted to leave that session. Must have been some great conversations. All right. Awesome. So I think we got everybody. So thank you all for attending. Lisa is going to wrap us up, and I'm going to start adding links to the chat so we can get feedback for how you think this event went. And if the panelists are all okay with it, they can share their email. If not, it's totally fine. They all have active LinkedIns, so feel free to network and reach out to them. And yeah, take it away, Lisa.
I think you did a great job with wrapping that up, Tess. But just if there's any other questions about the deliverable, the link is in the chat, but we'll be sending it out to everyone who signed in for this. I really want to thank our panelists, both for their honesty in telling us, your story, as well as what can our students and postdocs do, now. I think that's kind of one of the biggest things for them to be thinking about the different types of opportunities that they could be searching out, whether we have them at Jefferson or not, ways that they can do that. But if they have, if any of our students and postdocs on here heard things tonight and said, ooh, do we have that? Is that some way that you could help me with that? Please reach out to myself, reach out to Jenny Schneider in my office as well. And we're happy to either connect you with people or organizations that we already know about, or help you figure out what might be available. I think other than that, you have until November 3rd. So we've given you 2 weeks. No, longer than that.
1 week.
It was 2 weeks.
1 week.
1 week to do the deliverable, which I know for some of the writing tests, you might get 2 hours to do something in advance. So we're giving you actually on the writing test side, probably a much longer period of time than you might have during a job interview situation. So keep that in mind. And then within 2 weeks after that, you'll get feedback either from Pam Walter and Ankit Roshani and the PCERT group, or from Chris Messick and Julie McDonald from the Career Development Center. But you'll be sending all of your deliverables into our SciComm series at jefferson.edu email address. It's on the deliverable sheet, or you can always email it to me if you forget what the address is. And other than that, I think a round of applause or virtual applause for our panelists. Thank you all so much for spending part of your evening with us. I know you've all had long days, and we really appreciate you being here and again, speaking to our students and postdocs. So I think with that, Tess, anything else, or anyone else from our planning, anything else to add? Pam, Karuna, Aurora?
Danielle, you have access to the link to the virtual outreach opportunity. If you could share that, that would be amazing. I know some students really like doing outreach with our group.
I just want to say thank you so much. You reinforced, for a bunch of my students are here today, you reinforced for them how important it is to have the skills of communication as a scientist. So thank you so much for reinforcing that.
Thanks, Pam.
Awesome. And we are only 1 minute over time, so let's end on a timely fashion. And thank you all again. Hope to keep in touch with everybody and see all of the Jeffersonians at the next session. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone. Stay well and keep healthy. Have a great one.
Yes, good luck, everyone.
Thank you.